Good morning. So, Seattle Interactive Conference, day 2, welcome. My name is Eric Perret, and I'm a member of the advisory board for SICK. And one of the things that means is I get to introduce brilliant people doing cool things. So, Jim Haven of Creature is just such a person. He's the Chief Creative Officer and one of the founders of Creature. It's a place that, in its own worlds, solves problems with creativity. So I think if you look at your program, you see Steve Cullen was to present as well. He is out of town on a production shoot. So I think we're going to see Jim model solving problems with creativity just now and carrying this solo. So please welcome him.
Thanks for coming. I was wandering around and looking at the various exhibits and the guys on the what are the things, the segues and that hilariousness, and it's a pretty funny world, I think, to come here for us. We live in a world that is interactive. And that doesn't mean necessarily technology, that means everything we do. And in terms of what we do as a company, creativity is how we sort of solve problems and how we talk to people and how we tell stories. And so when we got the opportunity to come talk about transparency, it was a interesting thing for us because we don't normally sort of get into sort of these worlds, and we solve things very specifically for clients. But it was a fun challenge, and we wanted to make it fun, so we decided to call the speech "Fun with Transparency," and we weren't sure exactly what that meant, to be honest with you. So diving in, we had to sort of learn and figure out what we were going to talk about. We had sort of some ideas about transparency and what it meant to us and what we were seeing. And it's almost like when you have a party at your house, you go in and you clean your house and you get ready and you come out and you have a party and everything. At the end of the day, you've made your place better. And I think that there's something to be said for myself and Creature and Steve and I that going into this, that we've learned a few things about transparency. And the first thing we've learned that it's really popular. So right now there's an entire conference dedicated to this subject, and it's certainly something that you can't ignore. Transparency, he's a rock star. He's a rebel. He's changing things, hanging out with the media, making CEOs sweat, making people incredibly nervous, and making people incredibly happy at the same time, because this appears to be a new version of the truth. This is accountability. This is people making decisions together. Dictating to dictators, transparency, he's kicking people's asses all around the world. So you can only imagine what comes after that. You've got covers of Time magazine, the future of transparency, the future of honesty, all these amazing things. What would follow that? Maybe the Nobel Peace Prize. Transparency, if he or she had neck or arms, it'd be easier. But at this point, we don't know. But we do know one thing. I think that there's a lot of people that would line up right now and say, hey, I want an autograph. I want to be part of this thing. I want to be part of transparency. So there's a little signature there. That's the autograph of our hero. But there's also other sides to transparency as well. There's the side that probably doesn't, that we're not looking at with as much, it's not quite as glamorous maybe. At least to some people, it's not, but you have this side, the infamous Twitter feeds of Amanda Bynes, and you can include a lot of other people on that list as well. Maybe Charlie Sheen and how he's, ruined winning for us all. And then there's other things. This is just a beach ball, right? I mean, that's fun. It's great for kids. Kids love beach balls. We all love beach balls. Gidget loves beach balls. And wow, we need to know stuff about beach balls because they are insidious tools of danger. This This is a real beach ball. There's 25 languages in which it tells us how dangerous this sphere is. And that's pretty incredible. It's amazing that our children, the first words that they're going to learn are warning and may cause death or injury in 25 languages. There's another side of transparency, aliens, Area 51. Sadly, that's going away. We have the Freedom of Information Act, and we're sort of learning that they were just making missiles and things like that. There were no aliens. They were floating balloons up in the sky, and it's pretty sad. You could see that this is a scientifically accurate chart here. It's with the rise of transparency, you see the downfall of conspiracy. So, what does that mean? It means sad conspiracy theorists, and perhaps they have to find new hobbies. I don't know. I think that maybe you could imagine prog rock might come back, or possibly macrame. I'm not sure. So, there's a lot of sides to transparency, actually. It's not as simple as when I looked at it and first kind of thought about it and said, well, this is there's a double-edged sword, and it's a social issue, and it's all these things. It's a lot more than that, and we're going to sort of explore all these different sides to it and what it is and what our perspective is and how we can deal with it and what we want to get out of it. Because it's all these things. It's the good, the bad, and the ugly. And also it's also a lot of fun when you start to think about it through the right angle and the right vision and vantage. So we've talked a little bit about all these different sides, the many multi-dimensions of transparency, that it's not exactly what we thought it was, not exactly what I thought it was. So as we take a closer look, we're going to learn a little bit about the fact that transparency, as much as we think of it as the new shiny object and the thing that everyone's attracted to and the new buzz, it isn't all that new. In fact, I think that anybody who has been in a relationship or even has pretended to be in a relationship can understand that there's a sentence here that is sort of a point of transparency that we've all probably faced at one point, and it's been around forever, probably way before jeans were around, I'm sure. And I think that the difference is actually related very closely to what's going on at this conference. And I think that transparency plus technology equals this distortion of what transparency really is, and we start to think about transparency in a different way because it's everywhere. But also we have more access to it. We have greater capabilities with transparency. The tools that we have allow us to go places that we probably shouldn't go, and sometimes are really good for us and sometimes are really bad for us. But we definitely have these new tools, and we get to see it all the time. And so we have a completely different perspective on what transparency is than we did on the previous slide that's been around for a long time. So that doesn't mean it's more important, actually. More of it doesn't mean it's better. It just means it's out there more. And so to kind of look at the whole thing, I think that to demystify it a bit, transparency isn't a movement yet, or a religion. It's not an ism, so there's no sort of philosopher behind transparency yet. It's not an ology, so it's not a psychology or ornithology if you want. It's barely a ness. So that's just simply my favorite nesses here. We have thoughtfulness, kindness, handshakefulness, and transparentness. Now, what do all these things mean? I mean, they don't mean, they mean it's not a giant thing that we're talking about here. transparency at this point is still a noun. And this is kind of an important point here, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, why this is. It's close cousins with a couple of these other words. We have disclosure and honesty. And the difference being that transparency is sort of maybe a new version of these things. It actually, by definition, is very close. But these words come with their own baggage. Or as my wife, who's Norwegian, says, they come with their own luggage. When you talk about disclosure, you immediately are feeling like you're doing something wrong and you're disclosing something. And that alludes to the fact that you're going to tell me something terrible. And nobody wants to do that, so we don't like to talk about that. And when we use the word honesty, it's a strange word because by virtue of just saying the word honesty, you don't believe me already. And so there's a great freedom in transparency, and you can see one of the reasons it's kind of started to kind of rise up. It's a new way to talk about something that already exists. And we like it for that. It's become very attractive, and it's become very useful, and we can take advantage of that in many ways. But it's definitely not some instant knob that you can kind of turn on or turn off to find the truth or to find honesty. But it's more like a tool, really. It's important, and we can use it, and it's interesting. But it's got a lot more uses than maybe we're even thinking about right now in terms of just finding the truth and making people accountable and all these sort of things that are rising to the surface right now. Because what it is it's a way to sort of reveal information. And in some ways, it's a style guide. It's a style guide on sort of how to reveal information. And if you think about it and you use it in the right way, it can be a very clever way to do that, actually. So I think the main thing is that when we talk about transparency, we talk about this information, and it's painted in this color of the truth. And the thing that's interesting about that is this is my belief, so, but I believe in addition to our opposable thumbs that we are sort of inherently all born as human beings with a desire to seek the truth. It's sort of an instinct that we have, and that's one of the things, along with our opposable thumbs, that makes us a species that has changed and evolves over time. And it's also the reason that I will turn on the TV every time I see a Bigfoot show and think that maybe this is the one they're going to find out if he's real or not. Maybe this is the one where they're going to discover him. Because I want to know. I feel like inside of me I have that sort of desire that everybody has to find the truth. And that is one of the things that makes transparency and the way it's sort of being talked about right now something that is just hard to turn away from, because it is painting itself in this color of the truth. This is what people want, and this seems like a great way to get it. And boy, if technology can give us the truth, then that's brilliant and perfect, because we always want a silver bullet. So let's break it down now a little bit as to what transparency is actually. Because I think it lets you understand a little bit how to use it and what we can all do with it and what it really means in terms of not just looking at the world in terms of truth, but in terms of storytelling and things of that nature. Because it is very useful in terms of telling a story. It's a great device. So the first part I think we'd all understand would be that transparency is about information. And information is, it's raw, it's pure, and unadulterated. It just sits there, and it can be whatever you want it to be. It's information, but it needs context to mean anything. And the other thing that is kind of cool about transparency is this word, access. I think that is kind of what gives it the other part that's really like, it's very intriguing. It's like a spy movie, access, the word access, and things that you can't get, but you might have access to. It's your VIP pass. It's the line around the door. Everyone's waiting on that. Everyone's waiting at to get in, and you can go around the back way, and this is something that no one else has. And there's always an appeal to that, that sense, and that's why people love to fly first class, aside from the fact that they get free drinks. There's this ability to feel like you have something and gain something from it. And so these two things together, I think, are usually what people would look at and say, well, this is what transparency is. It's information plus access. But there's a third part that's I think, super important, and there's intent. And that seems strange. If we're looking at transparency as the purest sort of form of information, a way to look at things in a way, from the point of the truth, then where does intent live in this world? But the fact of the matter is that somebody is arranging this information. Somebody is arranging the access. And they're doing that with an intent. Now, their intent could be having the best intentions in the world. They could be pure. They could seek the truth. They could want to do something funny. You know, they might want to tell people a story. We don't know, but there's always an intent involved in this information and the access. So that's the part that's a little bit strange, I think, that we sort of discovered as we started talking about transparency and what it is. But it also allowed us to sort of look at things in a new way and have a little more fun sort of digging into what it might be. And when you think about intent, I thought about the fact that even if it is pure, I went back to this Rush album. Not that Rush album, actually. That was the first one. And by the way, I'm really happy that I get to talk about Rush because I spent a lot of time when I was like a teenager listening to Rush, and my mom said, you'll never amount to anything, and now I'm actually using it in a presentation, so I feel pretty good. If you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice. And so I think that intent, even if you have it, just by the nature of it, means that there's something that you're doing there. There's an action that's taking place. And that means that this sort of utopian society, this transparent utopian society of truth and knowledge is a bit, right now, maybe more like a flying car. And that looks a lot like this is the Amazon campus, actually, in a couple of years. So if you go there, actually, the people, it really looks like that with the people running around. I'm kind of going through this pretty quickly, I apologize, but that's my pace, I guess. So transparency is actually susceptible to bias because the human being set its parameters. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to think about, actually. And we all know about humans as fallible people. We've all seen this, and so we know that we have problems. We don't always do the right thing as much as we want to. We like to eat apples, apparently, and because we like to eat apples, that means we can't necessarily tell the truth always, I guess. So I guess we're kind of talking about this. Maybe we're doing some whistleblowing on transparency, but it's not sad. It doesn't have to be like transparency doesn't have to sort of end up like a child star growing up that has hit the skids, and you find them in a hotel room somewhere, and they're selling used cars and living in a trailer. Transparency doesn't have to sink to that level. We're not saying that it's ruined and it's not great and doesn't have an amazing sort of potential possibility to serve us in the world. We're just talking about some of the things that we haven't really thought about before. So we like to look at it like this. Transparency is actually an art form. It's not necessarily a way to sort of manage numbers or data. It's an art form. And I think that's pretty interesting. And so, like all art forms, transparency, you just misunderstood. And that doesn't mean that you can't use it in different ways. It doesn't mean you can't find the truth. It doesn't mean you can't bring people on board, and you can't change society, and you can't throw leaders out of Egypt and places like that. You just have to sort of understand a little bit and the reasons why and what it's doing. So we're going to take a little look at what I mean by that here. And we're going to use an example that might surprise you. And that's Three's Company. So oddly enough, Three's Company is a really good example of transparency. And you just have to look at it in the right way, through the right lens. And so I think that the things that we'd want to accomplish from this is, one, how to use it, and how to recognize it. And the third, what that means to you. So I guess there's three things, just like Three's Company. To kind of set the level here, we have three people. We have Chrissy, Jack, and I believe that's Janet on the other side there. So there's a reason that we have these three people, and we'll talk about what their role is in this. But there's other characters in this show, and there's also a writer. So that's Mr. Furley, and in this episode, Mr. Furley is going to represent the public. You and me, we're all Mr. Furley today. And then we have information, and Janet could be part of the information, but actually she's not in this episode. It's actually Chrissy and Jack. They're going to represent information for us. And then the writer of the story, the person behind the scenes, that's the person that actually controls access and also has intent. And it's interesting because you can kind of see how this will all sort of come together. Now, if we have to play it twice, I can, but I'm going to play this right now for you, and then we'll talk about it.
Jack, just hand me the new curtain and then you can go, okay?
No, Chrissy, I'll help.
Oh. I'll get it! Oh, hi, Mr. Furley. It's nice to see you.
Don't get your hopes up. This is not a social call.
Ah, shucks.
Today I'm wearing my landlord hat, and I want to see the man of the house.
Oh.
Unless he's painting his toenails.
Jack is in the bathroom. Would you excuse me?
Surely.
Thank you.
Okay, Chrissy, I'll get in the tub with you, then we can get it on.
Get next to me. I'll show you what to do.
This isn't exactly the first time I've ever done this.
Maybe so, but girls are better at this than boys.
Come on, Chrissy, a little less talk and a little more action, okay?
Okay, you do your part. I'll do mine. I don't think it'll reach.
Of course not. You've got to unfold it first.
Laugh tracks are so great.
Mr. Furley? Mr. Furley, what are you doing?
Never mind what I'm doing. What are they doing?
Nothing.
Oh, don't give me that. I heard. Rub-a-dub-dub, come hop in my tub. I heard all of it.
You heard all of what?
What is going on in here?
Yeah, I was just asking. How'd you get...
So, he heard all of it. He knows everything. He has all the knowledge he needs. He heard everything, right? He was there. He had access to information, personal access to information. So, if we take a look at this, if this will advance. So we have Mr. Furley, we have the public, and then we have information on this side. And then we have the writer in the middle, and the writer actually has an intent, and he's using access to the information to create intent. In this case, his intent is making the audience laugh, is making everybody laugh. So he's able to use the access, control the access to the information, being Jack and Chrissy talking about hanging a shower curtain, which as an omniscient audience, we can all see. We have actually complete access. But the writer is only given the public limited access because that's the effect that he wants. His intent is to create humor. So it's interesting when you think about transparency that it has the ability to do a lot of things. It has the ability to sort of to manipulate the way you think about things. It has the ability to sort of control conversations. It has the ability to tell stories. Actually, it has the ability to be incredibly funny, which is great. So let's look at another sitcom. This one's called WikiLeaks by Julian Assange. So, it's super popular. It's going, and people are talking about it all the time. The ratings are great. Unfortunately, he's not being paid, and he's living in exile. But let's look at the parallels here. So, we have the government has information. They're talking about spying. They might be talking about grilling. We don't know exactly. They're talking about stuff. They're talking about world leaders. And who's cooler in the European countries. And then we have the public. That's us on that side. Not the most flattering image, I guess, of us, but that's kind of the representation here. And we're Mr. Furley in this scenario. We've got access to information because it's provided to us by the writer, who has intent. So, what do we get out of that? Well, unfortunately, in this scenario, it's not on television, so we don't have an omniscient point of view. We can't see the entire picture. We don't actually know exactly what's being said, but we do know what we're being allowed to hear, and we do know that that's being done with intent. Now, the intent could be honesty. We don't know for sure. Honesty could be the intent. It very well may be. It could be accountability. These are all noble causes. It could be these things. But it could also be free rent in the Ecuadorian embassy in London, because it's very, very nice, and it's in a great neighborhood. And aside from the fact that you can't get out and enjoy the neighborhood, it seems like a decent place to be. Or it could just be witty banter between the German chancellor and Obama, you know? We don't actually know what the intent of the writer is in this case, and so we can't really tell. We don't really know what the purpose of the transparency was. We can only postulate, and we will jump to our own conclusions, just like Mr. Furley jumps to conclusions on his own. And that's a pretty interesting thing about transparency, and something that sort of we discovered as we were kind of talking about it and going through this. This is not something that we sat down and said, okay, let's talk about transparency and find out what it is and have a good time and talk about it. This is something that we were sort of discovering in this process. This is what we learned. This is these are the paintings we hung on the walls of our house for the party, which is pretty interesting and pretty fun to look at. So I guess at the end of the day is, for transparency, we don't know what we don't know. And that doesn't mean that the world's going to end and transparency isn't great. We love transparency. Obviously, we're all here. But you're very useful, just not incredibly special, as we might believe. Excuse me just for a second. I'm mostly doing that because my presentation is pretty short, and if I don't take a sip of water every once in a while, I'll just be down and never be. What a waste. So I guess at the end of the day, we have to be responsible for our own honesty. We can't rely upon transparency to solve the problems that we sort of think that we have, because it can't do that actually. Transparency is a great device, obviously. We've seen how we can take information and make it into something really special. But if we're seeking the truth, we should seek the truth within ourselves, and we should ask it of the people that are around us more than we should rely on a word to do that for us, because we don't know exactly what that's going to be. So I think that now that you know what it is and how to look for it and how to think of it, the point of all of this is, I think, don't be Mr. Furley. Don't be sitting there and thinking that you know everything and have all the information, because if you do, then you're the one that maybe everyone's laughing at from an omniscient point of view that you can't see, because there might be a studio audience that we don't even know about right now. We're not sure, but I bet there might be somewhere. And that actually concludes my exploration into transparency and fun with transparency. So if anybody has any questions, I'll take them now. And oh, by the way, I think you're supposed to go to the microphone, otherwise they're recording it, and you won't.
Yeah, so
Get memorialized.
when you were doing this exploration, I mean, obviously, people have intent, and they may have intent for their reasons. But what's the responsibility of consequence? Of unintended consequence. You may have an intent being transparent for your goals, but if you're being transparent, then anybody can apply their own intent and create consequence that is unintended. So, I mean, did you guys, that's the whole thing that I think about transparency is like, hey, it's out there, and it's like you may have had the best intentions, but they may not be your intentions anymore because depending on how you did it, especially with personal information. And anyway, that's just
that would be the next sort of talk, I guess, because it's true, there is a huge responsibility that comes, with anything that you do, especially when you have the sort of the tone that's been painted across transparency as what it is, because it's being used and sort of being painted in a way that would call it something like the truth, or something that would talk about honesty. And that makes it a little bit more dangerous, because like I said, we all want to seek the truth. We love that as human beings, and we want that. And so the consequences, well, those are challenging, and they come down to a little bit of that last part, but I was saying that we have to sort of be responsible for ourselves a little bit. We cannot rely upon a word or a concept to allow us to do that, I think.
Yeah, I guess the follow-on is just like, if we're responsible for ourselves, but in this world now of digital, where we entrust others with our information, then we can, and making not a choice is a choice in and of itself. Because then we can't necessarily consume, the goodness that's being offered. I mean, there's kind of a, paradox. So, it almost feels like there's a responsibility in transparency to, trust our information somehow. There's honesty and accountability, but then, there's stewardship with being transparent, with Facebook or whoever.
Sure. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, since it's sort of becoming so hyperbolized and something that's new, it's something we all have to get used to be honest with you, because it's probably not much different than when you think about reporting. Reporting was the transparency of the past in some ways, because the access and intent came from a particular writer. Now, we knew who that writer was very clearly, and so we could challenge that writer, and hopefully they would get fired if they weren't speaking the truth, but we all know that there's biases involved and things like that. And I think that we've come to understand, and maybe transparency has risen from the ashes of journalism because of that, because we have now these incredible left and right sort of wings that people are sort of leaning to one way or the other, that makes the center feel very rare. But I guess maybe it's a little bit of just getting used to it and understanding it. And part of the point was let's take a look at it and understand really what it is, so we know how to use it and we know how to think about it. It's not to say that it's bad or good. It's just to say let's make sure that we're not looking at it as the panacea.
Hey, Jim, I've got a question for you.
Great.
When I see the Mr. Furley example, what occurs to me is that Mr. Furley is basically the example of the worst of our culture, which is that one of the things that when I see, I think it's a brilliant choice, because in a lot of ways the stupidity of Americans and American culture a lot of times in terms of what we're gullible for. Can you talk a little bit about that? Was that your intention by using Mr. Furley, or is it a social commentary at all, or am I just reading too much into it?
Well, it wasn't too deep, but I think that Mr. Furley is sort of a non-thinker, and but one of the big things was that I wanted to show a bit of how transparency actually can create comedy, and it can create that emotion in a different sort of context than we're used to, because we're looking at it in very serious terms, but also you can, and I was sort of using it as in a kind of a serious example, but at the same time, the other layer of it is that transparency has other sort of applications, and it can be sort of humorous, and it can help tell stories. Now, there is a nice parallel, I think, between the sort of the stupidity, the dunce of Mr. Furley, but in storytelling, classic storytelling, the dense can also teach us a lot usually. That's usually the person in storytelling that we'll learn the most from. He's the one that comes up and has the dumb idea. It's so crazy it just might work, kind of thing.
So my follow-up to that is then the roommate, the third one, right? I forgot her name now.
Janet?
Janet coming out, is that the role of the agency then?
You know, I didn't actually. I thought that you know that Janet was just the one that let him in the door. I didn't really think of it that far actually. So perhaps I'll have to go look at it again, and maybe that's how it works. But yeah, I mean, the introduction was there. She opened the door. The doorbell rang. So you could probably put that parallel together. Thanks.
You said this was a sort of house cleaning opportunity for you at Creature, and how did that pan out? What is your takeaway about transparency in your own house?
Well, I mean, I think that I feel like I have a really, a much deeper understanding of it than I would have had I just been someone passive on the outside. And I've always had my own perspective on it a little bit. I've always felt like there's a double-edged sword to transparency on a serious level where you do have something that could be extremely powerful, and you have people that are calling for it, but those same people are probably the people that will be inciting other actions and not putting their John Hancock on it. So there's this weird sort of side of it that has always sort of bothered me a little bit. And so digging into it and understanding it and kind of learning it and having a perspective on what it is, I think was incredibly important. And I think that's the best takeaway that I have is that it like everything else, it just has to be, you have to observe it and you have to understand that it's not as pure and perfect, that there's actually something behind it, that there is that intent. And that was the thing that I got out of it. But also, I think that as we are a creative agency, and as much as we go into the world and make things and they're judged, or they are sometimes we'll come up with ideas that are based on transparency, crowdsourcing or whatnot. The storytelling aspect of it to me was also something that was very compelling. Like digging in and kind of getting to that level of the fact that this is a tool and it's a style of communications, actually. That it is really that. And when you understand a style of communications, then you have the ability to use it in ways as they might not have been intended. And always, to me, that's one of the most important things. Whenever you come up with something and you find a new way to use it, that's usually when it becomes best.
I'd like to get a better feel for transparency on a practical level. Do you have a favorite example or a case study that would demonstrate perhaps in an enterprise environment going from less transparent to more?
An enterprise environment. Well, oddly enough, McDonald's is doing something interesting with transparency. And it started in Canada, and it did well up there, and so they've been bringing it to the United States. And it's shocking, but they are being incredibly transparent about what is in their hamburgers and their products. And it's becoming incredibly popular. And I think that in that instance, if it was really weird, if they had cockroaches ground up in their hamburgers, they probably wouldn't want you to know that, and so they probably wouldn't be as transparent. And whether they had created a product that was already suited for transparency, or it allowed them or made them, create something like that, then I guess it doesn't matter as much. But the fact is that it's been incredibly good for them, and it's gaining a lot of sort of viral popularity for people.
I guess what I was trying to ask was more on an internal basis. So within the corporate culture, transparency being promoted and implemented.
Being promoted within a company. Well, that's hard for me to look at within my own company, because I feel like usually the transparency is evident within the work that people do. You can see it. It's very, very clear. And we're small enough that I kind of get to know everybody there and what everybody does on some level. So I don't necessarily have the best examples for that within a corporation. I tend to think that some of the bigger corporations have different ways to sort of promote people, and they usually are point systems and things like that I don't really think that's transparency necessarily. I think that it's a weird sort of system that they put in place. I know that Microsoft has some sort of reward system and things like that, but
Okay.
so I'm sorry if I can't answer that very clearly to you, because
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the distinctions, the nuances between transparency and authenticity. I know that clients, you kind of interchangeably use those words, and how do you coach your clients on using transparency for their brands?
That's a really that's a good question. Authenticity versus transparency. I hadn't thought about that one. So I think that authenticity is like transparency. I think it comes from sort of the people and the product, if that's what you're talking about. But when I look at transparency, it kind of feels like that you are doing it with the intent of sort of revealing something that you feel like you want to let people know something about yourself. And authenticity is usually sort of a virtue that comes from within, right? It's something that people actually experience, rather than transparency is something you're kind of assuming people want to know, and you're forcing that action upon them a little bit. So I think that's how I would see it.
And do you have ever, I've had clients in the past who are very hesitant to be transparent, but they want to authentically be themselves. How transparent should you be as a company in today's era of being completely open and honest and sharing everything?
I think you actually just clarified the question before when you said that, because it dawned on me what you were really talking about in some ways. And I think that to be authentic doesn't mean to be transparent, because if the nature or virtue of that particular client is to not be transparent, then you shouldn't do that, because then that's an inauthentic way to express yourself. And so, to the degree that you're willing to do that, and that you feel like that's good for you, or that's authentic, true to who you are, then you should do it, because you shouldn't do transparency for the sake of it, just because it's the thing that people are talking about. You do it for the reason. And if you don't have a reason to do it, then you shouldn't. Because I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, no, we're not going to let you know anything. That's okay.
Cool, thank you.
I could use those laugh tracks right now. This was great. I actually thought about putting laugh tracks on more of the slides, but super hard to embed. It was memory intensive. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks a lot. Thanks for indulging myself and Steve Cullen, who's not here. We actually had it was, like I said, it was a great opportunity for us to sit down and really sort of think about something in a different way. And we, despite the fact that funny wasn't necessarily what this was intending to be, it was fun for us to sort of explore and figure out and hopefully share and just bring up some points I think that are definitely worth talking about and worth thinking about and as we sort of look at this world, and you get to see all these different great speakers and learn all these different perspectives on things, and hopefully this is one that you can use as a slight filter for that. But again, my opinions and the others that sort of helped me put this together. So thanks a lot.